Welcome to the Ghost Stories YouTube channel. Here, we will bring you the scariest experiences through ghost stories, mysteries, and inexplicable mysteries of the mysterious world. Whether you are someone who enjoys learning about ghost stories or simply looking for a new entertainment experience, our channel will be the ideal destination. Join us in the horror space and get ready for the most tense and scary moments. Don't forget to press the subscribe button and notification bell so you don't miss any new videos. Thank you for joining the Ghost Stories YouTube channel, and now, get ready for some spooky moments with us.
The deadly picture. Mr. Tan's house is right in front of the main street, a 6-story house, luxurious and fully furnished. Below the facade, on the ground floor, he sells pictures and advertising lights. On the top floor, he grows ornamental flowers, raises birds, and an aquarium. He is a tycoon in the interior decoration industry. Mr. Tan is getting older. Therefore, his partners all seem inferior. They worshipped him. The temper of people born in the year is very fierce. His wife, Mrs. Thin, is the year of the pig. The ancients said, tiger than Tai Hoi is in conflict with all 4 elements. The 2 of them were incompatible in age, but for some reason, they did well. Mrs. Thin is a few years older than Mr. Tan and is very beautiful. They have 2 children together. Mrs. Thin is very afraid of Mr. Tan. It would be correct to use the word scared like a tiger. But Mr. Tan skillfully taught his wife. Whatever he said, she listened carefully. Even when Mrs. Thin was at fault, he was punished by him to kneel all night right next to her bed. Everyone who works in my grandparents' house knows this. In short, Mr. Tan is a patriarch, domineering in his luxurious house. Everyone must obey him. His wife, when he calls or tells her something, is very polite and never interrupts. Raised her face to face her husband. Mr. Tan has 3 close friends who are also business people. But all 3 men were very afraid of their wives. That's strange. Those 3 friends are Duke, Han, and Thuan. One day, they gathered at Mr. Tan's house, happy to have just won a big contract. Mr. Tan sat next to his wife and gloated. In ancient times, people said, the chief family rules the country and puts peace in the world, but I don't have that talent. I only have the talent to teach my wife and do business. Thanks, that's how rich we are today. Mr. Duke exclaimed. You're really good. As for me, I can do business and have money, but I'm afraid of my wife. Is it miserable? Mr. Han interjected. I'm afraid of my wife, but I'm not afraid of my neighbor's wife. Anyone who is not afraid of their wife is not a good person. Mr. Thuan hesitated. But if you are too afraid, I will also be ruined. But I'm afraid that my wife will die. Mr. Tan smiled sarcastically. Because you guys don't know how to do it. Now that the tiger has full wings, how can he teach if bamboo shoots are not bent? How can bamboo be bent? Mr. Thuan asked. So how do you do it so well? Can you tell me the secret? Mr. Tan gloated. It's simple, teach your children from childhood, teach your wife from when she was helpless. My wife, I have to listen to everything I say. Is that true? Mrs. Thin lowered her face and mumbled. Yes, you're right. Because I am the husband, and you are the wife, you must obey your husband absolutely. The 3 friends widened their eyes. Mr. Tan continued. Read the teachings of Confucius that I still teach you every day. Mrs. T trembled. Yes, that is the sentence. At home, obey the husband. At home, obey the husband. Mrs. Thin teared up. Yes, the 4 virtues of a woman are merit, tolerance, speech, conduct. Mr. Tan happily Have you seen my wife's clear answer? A wife must be like that, otherwise she is a tigress, she will eat her without knowing it. Mentioning the word tiger, Mr. Thatch's friends shouted. No wonder you are the age of a tiger, but where did Thatch find a picture of a tiger that is so big and so beautiful? Mr. Thatch excitedly said. It is not a simple tiger painting, but an entire tiger carcass, enclosed in a glass frame. Its value is priceless. Looking at it, it looks like a tiger in the forest. I bought this set of paintings from Taiwan. Mr. Hein humped. So beautiful, so majestic, tigers die to leave their skin, people die to leave their reputation. When a tiger dies, other animals are terrified when they see it. Mr. Duke admires. You are 5 years old. Tiger, hanging this picture is very suitable. Mr. Tan gloated. This painting is not just a mere decoration, it is like a god of wealth. Since the day I got this picture, my family's business has clearly prospered. The tiger god protects me. Mr. Thwan laughed. No wonder your wife is as afraid of bees as tigers. As for those of us who have the spirit of pigs and chickens, we are only afraid of our wives. Ah, hey, I know a good fortune teller who eats and drinks. After that, let's go watch it for fun. Everyone cheered happily. Mr. Thatch said to his wife, please stay home and help me clean up. From time to time, do you want to test your fate? Mrs. Tian could only obediently nod. Mr. Thwan led the three brave people to a small pagoda, where there was a blind fortune teller. After reading the fortunes for 3 people, Mr. Thwan, Duke, Hein. Everything was fine. It was Mr. Thatch's turn, the fortune teller, to be surprised. Your fate is very good, you are rich, you manage your family well. But his life is the life of a tiger. Sooner or later, the tiger will pounce. Mr. Thatch chuckled. I'm the tiger's life, the tiger has to protect you, right? How could you grab it? The fortune teller was wrong on this account. The teacher said sternly. Heaven's secrets cannot be revealed, that's all I know. Believe it or not, it's up to you. When the 3 people left, Mr. Thatch smirked. It's true that the fortune teller lied and took money. My house is in the city, but he said I was mauled by a tiger, it's unbelievable. Mr. Thwan clarified. In the past, he rarely guessed wrongly, there are also tigers in the city. Mr. Tan said. Tiger, where can you show me? Mr. Thwan laughed. Well, at the zoo, where else besides, tiger pets are popular these days. You should be careful. Last time, someone came to see a fortune teller, and the fortune teller told him a horrible sentence, he was destined to die because of the river. The other man laughed loudly, I live in the city, why would I die because of the river? But in the end, I actually died. He got drunk and came home too hot, so he ran the water into the swimming pool. Then he suffocated in there. Everyone who heard it was horrified. Mr. Tan dismissed. Well, forget about that, it gives me a headache. The money is tied to a bib, so the fortune teller doesn't have to worry about me. I'm going home, I'm so tired. The 3 of them parted ways. Everyone goes home. People are still groggy from alcohol. Mr. Tan returned home and lay down to sleep. Mrs. Thin massaged her husband, suddenly her heart felt sad. She knew that Mr. Tan loved her and pampered her, but he treated her more like a slave than a wife. This afternoon, to show his authority to his wife, he embarrassed her. But because she was afraid of him, she had to obey. But Mrs. Thin is really afraid of Mr. Tan. Very afraid. It's different. Every time she looked at her husband's cold eyes, she cringed. People say that she has the spirit of a pig, and her husband has the spirit of a tiger, and the tiger eats the pig. In the past, when they were still in love and not yet husband and wife, Mr. Tan revealed his patriarchal nature, forcing her to always obey his wishes. And when there is an argument, she always has to be the first to make up. His weak nature made her fear him from then on. When he became a wife and husband, Mr. Tan was even harsher towards her. She was always shy towards him. Many times she blamed herself for being weak. But she was truly too weak and dependent on him. Regarding business, Mr. Tan is truly talented. From nothing, he created a career. Mrs. Thin does not have to worry about food, clothes, or jewelry. On the outside, everyone who looks at her praises her for being happy and having a talented husband. But they don't know her suffering. He sees his wife as an ornament, or more accurately, a slave. To be fair, Mr. Tan only loves business. Adultery is never possible. Although he is handsome, speaks elegantly, and is diplomatic. Of course, with outsiders. Mr. Tan has a strange hobby. Every time he thinks about it, Mrs. Thin blushes and blushes. Even though she has been his wife for 10 years. That is, he likes to strip his wife naked, admire and tattoo Miss Thin's body, almost every day. At one point, he forced her to kneel down, naked, with her hands behind her head, as if she had committed some crime. She wondered. Mr. Tan, I have not done anything wrong to you that you are forcing me to do like this. So you are my wife, not a slave. Mr. Tan kissed his wife lovingly. I like it like that, just indulge me. What men enjoy most is looking at their wives. Don't you want that? Mrs. Thin blushed. Of course I like it. I've been your wife for 15 years now, I haven't missed a day. So you're not bored? Mr. Tan was excited. Your wife is God's treasure for you, how can you get bored? I love you. Mrs. Thin sighed. Sometimes, I think you are a fierce tiger tormenting a little pig. But I have to accept it. Because you are my wife, I have full rights over you. Mr. Tan was happy. You're very good. That's a good wife. My duty is to take care of my husband, I don't have to worry about anything. And after the conversations, there were extremely passionate affections that Mr. Tan gave to Mrs. Thin. Mr. Tan stirred and suddenly screamed. Help! Help me! The tiger pounced on me. His face showed panic, his eyes were dull. Mrs. Thin shook her husband. Mr. Tan, what's wrong with you? Probably because he was too drunk. Mr. Tan opened his eyes wide and was sweating profusely. He saw his wife next to him and calmed down. Mrs. Thin was worried. What's the matter? Are you that lost? Mr. Tan stammered. I had such a terrible dream, thinking about it makes me sweat. Mrs. Thin asked. You are a person with nerves of steel, everyone is afraid of you, especially me. Why are you afraid of dreams? Mr. Tan blankly said. You just don't know yet. He found himself lost in a dense forest, the path was tangled with trees. He was struggling to find a way out, when suddenly there was a tiger's roar. He turned around, his heart stopping with fear, a huge tiger, eyes glaring at him. The tiger speaks human language. My friend, today you will be delicious food for me. I've been hungry for a long time. He shuddered. Oh my God, the tiger can speak human language. Are you a tiger ghost? The tiger roared in fear. It rushed in and pounced on him. He frantically ran away. But not in time to see his head severed, his body lying in one place, the tiger chewing his head greedily. Moments later, there was a black dog, it pulled him into a corner and ate the rest of his body. Dreaming about it, he woke up in a daze. I really don't understand. Mrs. Thin stared at her husband, looking at Mr. Ton, she felt so pitiful, where was the majesty of a heroic husband in her eyes? She comforted him. Oh my, why do you believe in dreams? Your life is the life of a tiger, should it bless you? Mr. Ton sighed. I know it's like that, but today, I happened to follow Mr. Thwan to see a fortune teller. The fortune teller said I was mauled by a tiger. Isn't that scary? Mrs. Thin laughed loudly. It's true that that old fortune teller spoke nonsense, there are no tigers in the city. But at the tiger zoo, people keep several layers of cages tightly locked, what's there to be afraid of? Honey, tomorrow the child wants to go to the zoo, please let me and the child go. Mr. Ton shuddered. What if we meet a tiger that has escaped its cage? Come on, let's go to the beach to swim and have more fun. Mrs. Thin sighed. Why is your husband so shy? It's natural to be afraid of stupid things. If you're afraid, then me and the child will go alone. His child likes to go to the playground, but he doesn't want to go to the beach. Mr. Ton was scolded by his wife, his blood boiling. Yes, you're right, what the hell do I have to be afraid of? Tomorrow I'll take you out to play. Mrs. Thin happily said. Is that so? Okay, let's sleep, I've been massaging you for a while now, I'm so tired. Mr. Ton hugged his wife and lovingly said. If you want to sleep then sleep, but you have to let me love you first, right? Mrs. Thin sneakily said. Look at you, your face was as green as a leaf, now you're demanding. If you want, you can do it, I'm your wife. Mr. Ton stripped his wife naked and looked at it. With a look of joy, he completely forgot about the terrifying dream he had just had. He only knew that his wife was Mrs. Thin. Pretty. Her breasts are full and round, her thighs are long and slender, just like those of a model. Even though I'm over 30, I'm still burning with love. After Mr. Ton fell in love with his wife, he fell asleep. The next day, Sunday, the weather was beautiful and sunny. Mr. Ton took the car and waited for his wife and children to go to work. The two children ran around and went to the tiger's cage to tease them. The angry tigress bared her fangs and growled. Mr. Ton stopped panicking. Hey you two, don't tease him. That tiger is very ferocious. The two children laughed hard. Dad, it's already locked in the cage, what's there to be afraid of? But father has the star of the tiger, so why are you afraid of it? Mr. Ton muttered. Yes, what are you afraid of? I'm so confused, I keep being haunted by dreams. He went to the tiger and looked at it. The tiger saw him and stared. Suddenly it roared wildly. Mr. Ton felt dizzy. The tiger's eyes seemed to glow. Its mouth roared as if to say, I've been waiting for you for a long time, come quickly and give your life to me, you can't escape me. Mr. Ton screamed in dismay, held his head and ran away frantically. Mrs. Thin quickly ran after her husband and helped him sit on the stone bench. People hanging out looked at them, not understanding why Mr. Ton was so scared. Mrs. Thin was stunned. Mr. Ton, are you tired? Sit down and rest for a while. What does that tiger have to fear? Mr. Ton hesitated. I don't understand why I have such a strange feeling. Have you ever known what fear is? Suddenly his eyes widened. Next to him, on the stone bench where he and his wife were sitting, there was a stone tiger, it stared at him. The look captivated him. He stammered. Don't be like that. It's terrible. Mrs. Thin was worried. What is it, or are you tired or mentally weak? Let's go to the hospital for a health checkup. Mr. Tan pointed to the stone tiger. Mrs. Thin laughed. You have autism suggestion, everywhere you look you see tigers. There's nothing wrong, it's just a stone tiger. Mr. Tan breathed a sigh of relief. But you always thought it was a living tiger. It's completely soulless. Mrs. Thin smacked her lips. You should now take on the form of a rabbit, but as a tiger, who would be so afraid? Mr. Tan seriously. Are you kidding me? You should remember, you are my wife. Okay, is it just an illusion that makes you like this? But you already said it. Going to the zoo today is an afternoon for me and my kids. Mrs. Thin was scared. I'm sorry, don't be angry with me, I always respect you. Mr. Tan said nothing, his eyes looked far away. It seemed like he was thinking about something vague. Mrs. Thin suddenly had a premonition that something was wrong. Your husband has been so strange lately. That night, Mr. Tan was sleeping and saw a fierce man enter. His eyes flashed, his hair was shaggy. Mr. Tan screamed. Who are you? Why did you come into my house? The man growled. I am the one who is hunting you, but do you still have the right to ask that? Mr. Tan stammered. Looking for me? What crime do I have to pursue? The man rolled his eyes. I'm looking for you to eat meat, what else is there to ask? Please open your eyes and look carefully. In a moment, the man opened his mouth and turned into a huge male tiger, his mouth full of blood. Mr. Tan howled, waving his arms and legs as if he were tied tightly, his mouth mumbling. Mrs. Thin panicked. Mr. Tan, what's wrong? You seem to be having an epileptic seizure. Mr. Tan struggled for a long time, then opened his eyes and sweated profusely. Am I still alive? Who just called me? Mrs. Thin was worried. I called you. You scared me so much. When I didn't, I screamed like someone whose soul was captured by someone. Mr. Tan was stunned. I dreamed of being mauled by a tiger again, honey. That tiger turned into a fierce man, came to him, instantly transformed into a tiger, and pounced on him. My brother-in-law was so upset, he screamed. At that time I called him to wake up. Mrs. Thin grumbled. In the end, it was all because of Mr. Thwan. Suddenly, when he was calm and well, he took my husband to see a fortune teller, he's scared. Tomorrow, I'll scold him. Mr. Tan sighed. It's not Mr. Thwan's fault, don't talk nonsense. Maybe it's because he's working too hard. Or is there a tiger ghost in my room? Mrs. Thin brushed it off. Don't say that. Are there ghosts in this room that we've lived in for 15 years? So you consider me a ghost? Mr. Tan was stunned. You didn't say that, but I'm really worried. I don't understand why. I can't control my behavior. Well, tonight you sleep in the room, I'll go to the living room to sleep. Mrs. Thin sobbed. It depends on you. How could he have the health to work? Mr. Tan went to the living room, lay on the sofa, turned on the bright light. Sure enough, the nightmares disappeared and he fell asleep. Delicious. The next day, he felt refreshed. He happily told his wife. I already understand my illness. Because you think too much. Last night sleeping here, I felt healthy, no more nightmares. Mrs. Thin was surprised. Is that so? But I'll only stay one night. You have to come with me tomorrow night, I'll leave you alone. Mr. Tan smiled. Look at my wife, she is increasingly dominating her husband. All right. I will do as you wish. But every time he entered the room with his wife, Mr. Tan had nightmares that became more and more intense. And when he went to the sofa to sleep, under the painting hanging on the wall, the picture of a tiger, he slept soundly and peacefully. He said to Mrs. Thin, From now on, I will sleep in the sofa, when if you need any marital activities, I will come to you. Don't stop me anymore." Mrs. Thing could only nod and sigh. "Well, it's up to you, you are the life of this family. I have to take care of you." Mr. Tan was touched. "You are always my good wife. I love you." Mr. Tan's health returned to normal, his working spirit was enthusiastic, and his family became richer. He looked at the tiger painting and happily said, "Tiger painting, are you my god of wealth? With you, I feel very secure. No ghost can scare me." Mr. Thwan came to visit, saw Mr. Tan sleeping in the sofa, and joked, "What's wrong, Mr. Tan? Is your wife restraining you? You are proud to be the one who teaches your wife so well." Mrs. Thin grumbled. "Is it all your fault, Mr. Thwan?" Mr. Thwan was surprised. "What's wrong? I didn't do anything to make you guys angry. On the contrary, I still admire him for the way he teaches his wife." Mrs. Thin pursed her lips. "Teach your wife? I have nothing to teach, I always obey my husband. I didn't dare disobey him." Mr. Thwan was stunned. "So why does he sleep in the sofa? It's confusing." Mr. Tan grimaced. "Because ever since I went with the fortune teller until now, I've always had nightmares." Mr. Thwan asked. "Is that about fortune telling? I forgot. So what kind of nightmare did you have?" Mrs. Thin was angry. "He always feels like he's being mauled by a tiger. When he sleeps with me, he always has nightmares, but when he goes to bed, he sleeps well." "Grandpa, am I the ferocious tiger that mauled him?" Mr. Thwan laughed. "Oh my God, how can you believe that fortune-telling story?" "But Miss Thin, you are encroaching on your husband more and more every day. It's like she has the essence of a tiger, and he has the essence of a pig. But thanks to that, I can assert myself. Women have to sometimes rise up and live in their husband's shadow forever." Mrs. Thin was excited when she was praised, but then became depressed. "But me, I'm very worried, Mr. Thwan. Because my husband has never had nightmares before." Mr. Thwan smiled. "It's okay to let him have nightmares for a few days. That's how you know fear. If you go at night for a long time, you will encounter ghosts." Mr. Tan was embarrassed. "You keep joking. But it's also strange. When I sleep under this painting, I feel protected and don't have any nightmares." Mr. Thwan was curious. "Is that so? So this painting suits you? Is it your guardian angel? Why don't you put the painting inside the house, in the bedroom?" "But having a husband in one place and a wife in another is really embarrassing." Mrs. Thin blushed. "How do you know about other people's spouses? So you come here and invite my husband to see a fortune teller?" Mr. Thwan shook his head. "No, I forgot about that. I came to visit my grandparents, because I hadn't seen each other for a long time, that's all. By the way, let's invite him out for a few beers." Mr. Tan waved his hand. "Well, another day. And now, here, I treat you to a drink. Long time no see." Mr. Thwan happily agreed immediately, and the drinking party was jubilant. Mr. Thwan left, Mr. Tan went to the sofa to sleep. Mrs. Thin covered him with a blanket, then turned off the nightlight. In the middle of the night, Mrs. Thin heard a very strong bang, and Mr. Tan screamed in pain. "Oh my God, I'm dead." Mrs. Thin ran out in panic and turned on the light. A sight that terrified her. The entire giant tiger painting pressed down on Mr. Tan. His body was crushed, blood poured out of his mouth. He stopped breathing. Mrs. Thin screamed, then fainted. Mr. Tan's funeral took place sadly. Mrs. Thin fainted and fainted many times. She sobbed. "Mr. Ton, why did you die so tragically? This deadly painting has harmed my husband." Everyone is sad. The story of Mr. Ton dying because of the painting became a rumor. Everyone thought the tiger ghost killed him. The nightmares that Mr. Ton had, perhaps came from the tiger painting. It's true that no one escapes the destiny of heaven. The painting was then burned to ashes. The end.
Thank you for taking the time to watch Ghost Stories video. Hopefully the content has brought you interesting and meaningful moments. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the Ghost Stories YouTube channel to follow the channel's next videos. See you in the next video. Have a good day.